Welcome to the Human Factors and Ergonomics Hub, a series of educational podcasts that showcase the connection between human capabilities and good work design, brought to you by the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society of Australia.
Hello and welcome to this episode of HFE Hub, the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society podcast. Today's episode is featuring Professor Anjum Naweed from Central Queensland University. Thank you for joining me today, Anjum.
Thanks, Kath. A pleasure to be here.
And look, I'm really looking forward to seeing you again at this year's Human Factors and Ergonomics Society Conference. Today, you are going to tell me a little bit about your upcoming keynote presentation. Can you give me a bit of a detail on what you'll be speaking about?
Yeah, look, Kath, I thought long and hard about this, and I guess I'm one of the naughty children here because it's taken me a while to get back to the conveners and sort of indicate what I want to talk about. But having looked at the other keynotes and what they're going to be speaking on, there's a large theme around artificial intelligence. And because I've got the last spot at the conference and having heard these previous presentations on really important topics. Catherine Burns is talking about HF, human factors, and the world of AI. And then Kate Conroy, I think, is talking about ethical AI. So I figured, why not try to thematically connect myself in an additive way to what they're doing and have a full 3-part arc for the conference. And in a way that tries to ride on the energy of what's there, but also ensure that people aren't losing the will to live at the point at which they might be when they're really the last stages of the conference. So I'm going to be talking about simulation and AI, and I think trying to unpack that relationship a bit, because those two things have an interesting dynamic, and I think it's something that people often don't talk about or think about or maybe make assumptions around. So unpacking that is going to be something that I want to do as the final part of that story.
That sounds really interesting. So what made you sort of consider, I understand, the theme of this year's conference being technology transformation and tomorrow's world. What draws you to the discussion of how humans fit within, for example, the relationship between simulation and AI?
Well, if you just sort of take AI out of the equation for the moment, let's just think about simulation. Yeah. And so do people actually understand what simulation is, or do people just sort of see it as one thing? It's very easy for researchers, for example, to think about simulation that's very physical, something that you do to test and analyze and figure out things. And people that aren't researchers, people that are in industry, for example, think about it in other ways. But conceptually, we interact with and see simulations every day, Kath. Babies with pacifiers are simulating something. When we're interacting with Google Maps, we're looking at apps that are simulating traffic patterns. Whenever we're checking what the weather forecast is, we're looking at simulations of what might happen. We're getting personalized feeds in our phones, which are simulating user engagement. Fitness trackers on your wrist basically are tapping into simulations of physical activity and health metrics. Chatbots. Ever interacted with chatbots, Kath, online?
Regularly try to.
That's a simulation. Watching TV, you're seeing people simulating roles, acting. If you're at work and you're doing a risk assessment, you're doing a simulation. You're thinking about what-if scenarios and trying to understand how the future might change or might be better managed with this process. So they're really powerful tools. And traditionally, I think you could say that they allow us to explore, analyze, and predict behavior without interacting with systems directly or with invariably unsafe situations. So they're really important tools for technical and scientific application. But I think also importantly, they're a really powerful medium for creativity as well. I talked about TV earlier. There's a lot of artistic expression and storytelling that's part of simulation. If you're seeing drama, you're seeing a simulation, on TV. if you're interacting with video games, simulation's part of storytelling and those complex environments. And whenever anybody is thinking about various scenarios, if you're about to travel somewhere, if you're a researcher like me, for example, and you're using a tool to get people to simulate, dangers at work or things that can be improved, you're exploring scenarios that may be difficult to simulate in real life, and you're also trying to creatively problem solve. So I think for HFE, simulation's been such an important tool, because you think about design prototyping, Kath, designers experiment with new ideas, concepts before creating physical prototypes, see what that looks like. And the whole idea of just thinking about scenarios, which is what we do all the time, is so integral to our work. So I think historically in HFE, training, design, system evaluation, they're all key pillars, I think, of what we do. And these are all simulation constructs.
That's a fascinating way to look at it. I never really thought of watching or engaging with drama as engaging with simulation, but really, you're right. It is part of imagining how somebody will react in a particular environment, and predicting their behaviour and predicting, how people might explore the world. In many ways, we're passive to that kind of process. How is AI? Going back to the theory, I suppose, or the context of technology and transformation in tomorrow's world, how does AI assist or not assist with that simulation?
Okay, so the relationship, then let's have a think about that. So artificial intelligence in its various forms makes simulations smarter. Okay, makes them more realistic, adaptive and predictive, as an example. But it's also a form of simulation itself. And so there's a meta quality to what artificial intelligence is. It's in its name. The word artificial essentially hits all the notes of simulation. So what is that intelligence trying to simulate? Is it simulating human intelligence, or is it simulating something more? So that's an important philosophical question right there. But if you think about the relationship between AI and simulation, as I said, it makes simulations smarter. They become more realistic, more real world. If, for example, you think about, military or flight simulations as an example, AI can model the behavior of opponents, look at changes in the environment, unexpected events, and make training more effective. So it does a whole bunch of stuff to enhance what simulation is. But simulation itself can train AI, if you know what I mean. So the more that AI does a simulation, the more that simulation goes back and feeds back into the AI.
Oh, okay. So you're talking about how we might affect the algorithm, and how we might, for example, impact the prediction of AI in the simulation by our own interaction with it.
Yeah, partly. I guess because, we learn from simulations through iteration, we get closer and closer to understanding what something might look like. If AI is enhancing simulation, the process of simulating is then training AI, if you know what I mean. Just like when we do simulations and we learn about what to do, we're getting trained by the outcome of what we're doing. And artificial intelligence is also learning more and more from what's happening. So there's a deeply intimate connection between those two concepts. And that's the kind of relationship that I think is quite important, because if you think about AI in the world at the moment, we're already simulating and predicting outcomes for many of the big industries using AI, healthcare, transportation, finance. You go to the airport and you're looking at the screen and you're thinking about when the plane's going to come in. I mean, there's lots of really, really large, complex models and algorithms that have been created to sort of present that information in that form, and to sort of model the way that system will basically behave. So it's already out there. And I guess the question then becomes, when people think about ethical use of AI, which is going to be talked about at the conference, but just to very briefly touch on that here, any kind of interaction with AI, especially with simulations, raises ethical questions, because simulations are basically being used to make decisions about people, and it affects their lives as well, if you know what I mean. And then that kind of also creates other kinds of challenges, because a simulation inherently is a probability judgment about the real world, how likely is something to happen based on what we know. And so that raises questions of accuracy, doesn't it? What's the level of quality in the models and what's being fed into them? And that's, I guess, where AI comes into play, because AI can think about some of those potential oversimplifications and model more complexity in a way that reflects the real world. But again, it is still always going to be, a scenario or a simulation of something. And so is that information important and better than something that we can come up with ourselves?
That's and fascinating, because often when you think about ethical use of AI, we think about it traditionally from those who are designing the algorithms, from those who create the AI or the system with which we're interacting. And really what you're saying is, every time we're interacting with AI, we are making our own ethical decisions as well, which can invariably affect how those algorithms interact from then on and predict behavior. And I think of how many times it's gone wrong when it comes to predicting crime. And, but when you talk about ethical use of AI, who are the users that you're thinking about mainly? Do any of us have more responsibility when it comes to ethical use of AI than others, or are we all responsible?
That's an important question. And I mean, I don't want to stray too far into someone else's territory here, because I know someone else is going to be talking about ethics and AI. But for me, I guess some of the most important fictionalized accounts of AI and or simulation that I remember growing up with, and that are an important part of my story, are, films like Jurassic Park, films like RoboCop, Terminator, just to name three. And if you think about these stories, they're all cautionary tales. They're all cautionary tales about our relationship with technology and creation and artificial intelligence, and this idea that there are implications around all of this. They're all kind of talking about, the programmable soul, and this idea of humans becoming transhuman in some ways down the track, bridging the gap between sort of humans and machine intelligence. And so going back to your question around ethics, I think that a lot of this is about us not necessarily always understanding what artificial intelligence is. We know that it's not human, but it presents as human. And if you're ever familiar, if you're familiar with the concept of the uncanny valley, which is often used, with movies and TV, when things are meant to look human, but they don't. And because they don't look quite human, the eyes are weird, or the CGI doesn't quite work. They fall into the nadir of the uncanny valley, which makes them rejected. We don't accept them, and then we see them as grotesque. Artificial intelligence, because we interact with, say, language models, or because we interact with other forms of it, present as human-like in many ways, but they also have their own intangible and uncanny valley property to them that raises questions of doubt, that raises questions of, okay, well, what will this mean? And I think some of them are very, very valid. There's a reason why we have so many stories in media about AI causing global catastrophe. But I guess the common denominator there for me is the human being. If you're talking about human-centered futures and technology, we can't sort of just think, well, AI is going to do this or that. What's the relationship between AI and human beings, if you will?
Yeah.
And how does that then tap into the potential that AI has, and then in turn the mechanism of simulation has in that relationship too. So I think a lot of people, when they think about AI and think about people, and obviously this leads to the question of ethics, it arises from that inherent conflict, that inability for people to resolve that for themselves, because we don't know enough, or we're trying to fill in the gaps, and all we have is essentially that feeling, and that feeling is one of quiet apprehension.
Well, I think we've been fed so many dystopian futures which feature, AI, and like you say, you think of RoboCop as a great example. I mean, but what we don't really consider is just how much we interact with simulation every day, which isn't dystopian, which is in our day-to-day life. And going back to that original discussion you had, and how much we are part of simulations or engaging in simulations all the time in what we're doing. Should we be considering how we're interacting, or being more cognizant of being part of that system as we're interacting with these simulations?
Human beings are flawed. I think that's basically something that defines what we are. We're drawn to stories about people that show a struggle, that show someone getting over something, someone having a challenge, and then us wanting to know, okay, do they address that challenge? What's the ending? What happens? That's basically, the nuts and bolts of a good story. And I think if you think about the unfolding human story, we have lots of challenges that we have kind of manufactured ourselves, sometimes unknowingly and sometimes knowingly. And I think, if you think about some of the real big problems out there, like climate change, simulations are being used to sort of tackle some of those problems now. When you think about disaster response, when you think about, say, things like COVID, wasn't that long ago, a lot of modeling is coming into play around what we can do and how we kind of deal with those sorts of things. And so I think that one might argue that we are already in the dystopian future that we've been seeing, we've been consuming, we've been aware of for quite some time. And now that we have arrived, or that we are there, what opportunities does what we have created present for us to not necessarily correct, but address some of the challenges that we've presented ourselves with? Because there's only one Earth. I remember going to a presentation that Professor Andrew Thatcher delivered about human factors in ergonomics and its role that it can play in sustainable futures. And I just remember him sort of saying, we've only got one Earth, but we're consuming everything at the rate of, I don't know, I think it was 5 Earths or something. And it just made me think, that's that then.
Well, there is a positive to that, though, and because it is still interesting the way, looking back to what you said about, that Stepford Wives approach of the uncanny valley, where you're not really sure whether or not you're dealing with the real technology or not. If we help AI to become more human, are we not going to be helping the simulations, and will address issues that may have been human caused to get better? And I mean, this is much more of a philosophical discussion than you probably thought we'd get into on a Friday afternoon. But nonetheless, we're part of this system. We're already engaging in simulation every day. Is there a potential then for humans to, and certainly for human factors specialists, to sort of utilise this to address not just issues that we've created, but to promote better kind of people, a society where we are working in a...
So, I mean, it's just such an interesting philosophical question, Kath, because if you're using artificial intelligence with the intent of making it more human, then, you are introducing flaws, because humans are, as I said earlier, sort of defined by flaws, and they can be unpredictable, or they can be very predictable. It depends on the way you look at them and the context around them. We love creation and we love creating. I think that, it's inevitable that we'll end up with an artificial intelligence that is so human that,
it's no longer artificial.
Sorry?
It's no longer artificial, perhaps.
Well, it will call into question what the meaning of artificiality is. We're all, some of us are more than human already in the way that, our interaction with technology is kind of going. We're seeing more and more blurred lines between that. That's, I guess, where the RoboCop cybernetic kind of metaphor comes into play here rather than an all-out, machine-based one. I don't know. It's just an interesting question that you're raising and for us all to sort of think about. But I think a lot of us are probably already there, or a lot of us can already sort of see what that would be like. But the problem around the ethics gets raised more and more and more because, I've played games where, there's questions about AI having rights and what that looks like. And that brings up all sorts of phenomenologically interesting questions that we've got to raise as well when we get to a future that's more, embedded with AI around us.
I'm hearing your discussion about how humans interact with simulations and the relationship between simulation and AI. I can't help but think this last session of the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society Conference will be anything but death knell. It's going to be very, very interesting. What do you hope people will get out of this last keynote session of the conference?
Well, I'm thinking about the whole arc of the conference. I will have had the benefit of, hopefully, if I'm there for the duration, hearing what others have said and sort of, calling back to some things that people have sort of said, looking at the key themes, but then also talking about my own topic. And so I guess at this point, I've got my own sorts of ideas about what my key messages might be, but they are going to change because they exist now and the conference hasn't happened yet. And once it does, I'm pretty sure that I'm probably going to change my messaging around what the vibe of the conference is. But, in essence, I would like people to go away from my presentation, at least, my keynote, to have had a much better idea about this relationship between simulation and artificial intelligence, and then to also consolidate that within the broader narrative of the conference around human factors and artificial intelligence and ethics. Hopefully there'll be synergy there with things that the people have spoken about.
It definitely sounds like it. I can't help but think we're engaging in a simulation now in a way by predicting what you might be discussing in the upcoming
Well,
keynote.
That's right. We are talking to one another virtually, and we're simulating the future. There's so many levels of simulation that's happening here, Kath. And like I said, it's everywhere. So it's interesting to look at that separate from AI and then look at the two things together, because that might lend more insight to people around what actually is artificial intelligence and how do we see the two.
And I think when you're looking at it from the lens of a human factors and ergonomics conference, the kinds of people who would be engaging in this kind of discussion won't be the people necessarily designing the AI. It may be the people who are engaging with it and might be engaging with the simulation. But what sort of skills do you think human factors and ergonomics, or what sort of lens do you think we can lend to these sorts of discussions that, say, a computer scientist conference would not be looking at?
So, we know a lot about people. We know a lot about people cognitively. We know a lot about them physically. We know a lot about the environment in which people are placed. That more or less summarizes in very plain language what human factors and ergonomics basically does around humans, the environment, and optimization. And we're very good at evaluating things as well, I think. We're very good at taking stock of something, auditing something, and getting an idea of what that means. So I think because we all know about people quite well and the environments they're in, the other key element here, of course, is design. So what are the implications of what we know about what we know, and then what we know about this other element, artificial intelligence, that plays into our ability to design, to enhance, to improve, to make things more efficient and better. And where does simulation come into that as well? So is simulation a mechanism to get there? Is it a mechanism that will help us train and learn and so on? Or is it something else? Is it something that we create or we develop through design to, tease apart that relationship with AI a little bit more as far as we can? And as far as we know, as you said, we're not the people that are necessarily right there creating it. Although I do know some researchers that are going to be, developing chatbots and things like that. And that falls in the purview of human factors, operational readiness, and all that sort of stuff. So I think once you've sort of understood it a bit more, then, you'll probably understand more about what that might look like for someone who's in the HFE disciplines.
And definitely it's going to be a fascinating discussion. Just as a reminder for those listening, the conference is on from the 25th to the 27th of November. So not long to get your presentation together for us, Anjum. I know it's going to be a really fascinating discussion. Are there any sort of final thoughts before we close off on what, certainly I'm going to be engaging with my Google Maps in a very different way today after this discussion. What sort of takeaways do we have before, or rather, even to prepare for the conference coming up in November? Any thoughts or questions that we could take with us before we come to your keynote?
Well, the conference is going to have presented a lot about AI before you get to my talk. So I guess people will be sitting there with a whole heap of knowledge that they may not have had or may have clarified things for them. So, I don't really know how to answer that, Kath, because I guess people can arrive and then leave with an idea about what I'm sort of saying, but people will almost certainly arrive with a much, much better idea on what artificial intelligence means by virtue of the other keynotes and other presentations, of course, as well, that will be at the conference. Hopefully it will be a good way to just reflect and think about that. Between now and then, I'd like everybody to be more mindful about how they interact with simulations every day. I think it's quite important because it's just everywhere. It's like physics now. It's just basically everywhere we have simulation in some form conceptually. And I think when you start to operationalize that, for discrete tasks, for things that can help you and blah, 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 it helps. And then when you start thinking about AI coming into the mix, would that help or hinder what you do and how you interface with simulation now?
Yeah, I really cannot wait to hear this discussion further. And look, Professor Anjum Naweed, it's been an absolute pleasure to get to speak with you about your upcoming keynote. I'm really looking forward to it. It might be the last day of the conference, but I don't think you'll have people too bleary-eyed by the end of it. It could, if this discussion's anything to go by, I think people will feel quite enlivened by it. So the conference, as I said, from the 25th to the 27th of November. And the beauty of registering for this conference is even if you can't attend physically, you can attend virtually and simulate like we are right now with our discussion. You also can get a recording of the presentation afterwards. So please, if you haven't registered and you're listening, get on board because there's going to be some fascinating discussion. Professor Catherine Burns, Dr. Kate Conroy, and of course, Professor Anjum Naweed, who's speaking with me today. Anjum, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Not at all. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us at the Human Factors and Ergonomics Hub, brought to you by the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society of Australia, where human-centred design really matters. If you like this podcast, make us your favourite in your podcast app. We look forward to chatting with you next time.